Om. Satyanandam. Om. Tat Sat. Om. God speaking to God directly about God. Om. Bless this convergence in all its phenomenal aspecting, seen and unseen. Thus commences the fifth live stream teaching of SATYAVEDISM, entitled Om Satya, Introduction to God Manifesting Shaktis, Siddhis, Psi Powers, Lssv 5. Om. These teachings are direct knowledge, always, with no fiction, no hearsay. Om. Om. Some Lssv meta information. The following teaching might perhaps be rather lengthy. The live stream teachings will vary in length and duration and density. And there will be extracting and excerpting of the video live stream teachings, God willing. Om. There should always be the statement of God willing when expressing such God information about God intentionality. Om. So there must be statement about God whole reality in order to begin to express God omnipotence and God omniscience. Om. there is God's soul, the one and only soul. And within that, there is God consciousness, the whole consciousness. In which there is God intelligence, God awareness. Awareness of God manifestation within God itself. Not creation, no separation. It's within, as God. And that omnipresence that runs through the manifestation, the omnipotence that is expressed, the omniscience of knowing itself. The manifestation being expressed through it, God omnimathing or omnimathence and goading. So within that reality, that God reality truth, the knowing of actual God omnipotence directly and God omniscience is realized. Another name for it is Shakti, God Shakti, God energy, God omnipotence, God might and power, manifesting itself in endless expression. Again, God being the source, God, the divinity, Brahman, Ishvara, but God is not limited to the concept of what Ishvara is. As stated, God encompasses all of those labels within it and all of those attributes and aspects. Now, God information is never lost, and it never deteriorates. It is always accessible. It transforms, but it is never lost, and it never dies. So all of this God information is accessible to the whole. As such, there is no privacy in God. The idea or the feeling of privacy is an illusion. All is known. All information is accessible through God Intel Tech, God intelligence networks. All information is distributed seamlessly, holographically, in all. God omniversal networks. Now, Shakti, God omnipotence. Again, Shakti is energy, omnipotence, all powerful, all potentiality, God manifesting. But it is God manifesting of the whole, not of a pseudo individual or individuals or diversity that appear that to be like as that, but in God reality is not. So God consciousness is everywhere, and God energy travels, in a sense, faster than the speed of light and is inseparable from God consciousness. So it is everywhere all at once. And therefore there's access to all. So there's no locality in God. And all is available in eternity, with no consideration of any fictional past, present, or futuring. So all the information is accessible, even though it may seem to be past, present, or future information. It is all concurrently accessible in eternity. Now, in eternity. So all God phenomenon occurs within God consciousness, and this allows the transmission and receiving of all information. Now, there are what are called Siddhis, Shaktis, powers, psi, ESP, psychic abilities, psychism, paranormal. All these words, concepts, ideas are synonymous. There are not really any distinctions between them, although in relativity there are all sorts of ways of comparing them and contrasting them and all, but basically it's all the same phenomenon of God energy and God omnipotence and God consciousness, God omniscience, knowing. So in SATYAVEDISM, these are all synonymous. Now, the distinction is being made between a God reality and actuality and the fictional feeling of entities having power. So this has to be made very clear. These powers are of the one whole power. They are God's powers, God's direct powers. within itself. Again, the subject, as in subject-object, the subject is God, not individual entities in the dream or the dreaming. So this is God interacting with itself as the whole. And this is not about manifesting or developing powers to fulfill what would be considered egocentric desires or even species-centric desires, or manifesting control over seeming God in the form of others. Or practicing magic in the sense of again, power over individual powers. Or asserting individual will that does not exist. It is God whole will. Will of God, of all of God. Not the illusion of individual will over other individual wills, etc. So this is not for personal gain of persons that do not exist, or for any seemingly harmful purposes, such as binding spells, even if they are intentionally seemingly beneficent, or any outright negative, harmful asserting will, such as psychic violence or violent thoughts that can actually end up manifesting and causing harm and destruction as physical events due to intent. And these abilities are not to be haphazardly manifest through density of ignorance. This has to be stated clearly so that there is no misinterpretation. There's no misuse of power. That is why it's important that there be self-realization and God-realization. Again, as God already, but clearing out impurity and all that seemingly is in the way of clear God vision. This information has already been conveyed in the previous live stream teaching, the subject matter being purification and dehypnotization of body, the body appearance, hallucination, and the thought purification, thought content purification, etc. So all of this is a seeming processes toward the clearing in order to naturally manifest, God manifest these God omnipotencies. So as the clearing of the pollution and the illusion and the fiction, etc., all of that seemingly is obscuring God reality, the God Shakti, all the powers seemingly begin to occur more and more. They naturally manifest from realization. All these powers that seem to have to do with skill and development are not that. There is no person that's attempting to develop these powers. That's seen from the other side within dreaming. That is not actually how it's occurring. And then when all is cleared, and there is full God realization, then all of God Shakti's powers, etc., all the God omnipotence, God omniscience, just is. There is no developing it. It seems to manifest more and more and more. But when all is clear, there is no time in which anything develops. All of these powers just are. They manifest naturally. They're always available. In eternity. There is nothing super or para or all those superlatives that indicate something abnormal. Again, there are no miracles. All of that is seen from there being something aberrant. That there's occurrence occasionally. And it cannot be explained. And there's shock and amazement about those seeming events. But all of this is naturally free-flowing, spontaneously available, always, to be manifest. Completely naturally. Then there's just, in a sense, omni-translational knowledge of God myself fully. This is available to seeming God in the form of all, Om, perhaps unbeknownst to the fictional entities that seem to be, but are not. Om. So there is direct access to all, seen and unseen. Most of God manifestation is unseen. So if there is belief in only the seen, then again, that is myopic limitation of superimposition of limitation upon God reality. And if the belief interferes with that God potentiality of manifesting God omnipotence, then that is what manifests. So again, in God reality, there is no paranormal or supernormal or extrasensory. That can only be seen from the standpoint of the dreaming, like within fiction. Because those powers are not overstood. As the God omnipotencies and God omnisciences, the knowledge of God myself by myself, by God myself. in God reality. So this is all beyond species, body, senses. And the beginning of the truth of it is what is called spiritual capabilities. Now again, there is no distinction between consciousness, conscious, subconscious, unconscious, in God consciousness, because there are no barriers, there are no divisions. But when there is clearance, God consciousness is seen to be directly fluid with boundless access. So again, these powers become natural and are natural when not clouded by ignorance. So seeming powers that seem to be partial or intermittent or occasional are then felt to be continuous and spontaneous and fluid with the natural simultaneous transmissioning and receiving. And boundless seeming interactivity. Now, as to direct access of all these seeming capabilities, again, these intermittent seeming capabilities that pop up here and there and seem to be aberrant start to occur more and more as there is the seeming processes toward self-realization and then toward God realization. Realization of what you are right now in eternity, God. So purification of the body again, the body and thought content, and the dehypnotization to clear in order for transmitting and receiving. So there has to be the calming of the mind activity. This is very important in being able to be open, more and more open to transmitting and receiving. So the controlling of the mind, controlling of the thought content, controlling of the mind currents and the mind energies. And as that occurs more and more, it will become apparent through God will. Again, of being able to turn those currents on and off and have it flow at different level fluctuations. So meditation, again, is crucial. The quieting of the mind and the noise and the nervous system and the sensory withdrawal. Pratyahara. It is not sensory deprivation. There's nothing that's being deprived. That label is not appropriate. It's more about consciousness withdrawing from senses in order to manifest Shakti that is not directly through senses at all. It's not extra senses. It's beyond senses, beyond sense. So there's the practice of focused concentration first, and then that leading to meditation, what's called the practice of meditation. Again, there are many practices within that, but generally, practice of meditation. And then that leading to what is called samadhi or turiya, then turiyatita, which is beyond. This is beyond states. And the states do not really exist. That is when there is feeling that there are divisions in levels of consciousness, that these words are used in order to make distinctions. When there is going beyond those seeming states and it becomes obvious that there are not any demarcations or boundaries from one to another. The word samadhi or turiyatita is used in order to convey that, but it is not a person that experiences that as an individual consciousness. And so this is why Satya continues to say over and over again that it is God whole consciousness, and that there are no states within God whole consciousness and God's soul. But these words are used in order to indicate some sort of practices, as long as these divisions seem to be felt in some way. So then another practice, again, this is called within the dream state, as these divisions of waking, dreaming, deep sleep without dreaming, etc. You are the God consciousness that permeates all of that and is always present within it, what is interpenetrating and beyond all of that seeming phenomena of divisions. So in the dream state, when there are not the more rigid thought concepts and thought architecture reconfiguring, there is more seeming openness to possibly transmitting and receiving within that phenomenon of what is called dreaming. And I'm not speaking of the dreaming fiction, dreaming within what is called a waking state that is not real. This is the supposed dreaming state, or where there can be what's called lucid dreaming, which is waking state within dreaming state. There are blurs in the distinctions as the peeling of all these seeming divisions occur. So there may be more access to information transmitted and received in dreaming state because there is less rigidity and it is more malleable. And then the use of what are called psychedelics to break open rigidities in thought processing and open up the awareness to be able to transmit and receive information that might not be available to in what is called waking due to, again, rigidity and closed downness seemingly of the pseudo personality with all the distractioning. Now in the dreaming supposed state or the psychedelic supposed state, various levelings that seem to exist, there has to be the recognition of what are fantastical interferences or interferencing with the potentiality of opening up to the transmitting and receiving empowerings. So this is where being able to cut through, which again is another power, to cut through and be able to distinguish between fictions and fantasies and what actually might be receiving of information that is being transmitted is crucial. So those seeming states, there might be more openness to the abilities to transmit, God transmit and God transmit and receive and transmit and all, and being able to know when information is being transmitted for receival and the other way around. Because sometimes there's a blur and there's not ability to know if it's being transmitted or being received. That might seem paradoxical, but it's not. it becomes clear then what is occurring. So within these seemingly normal states, there is more openness or closed downness to and it also becomes clear the difference between what would be train of thought or reoccurring thought, or again fantastical thought within these altered seeming states, and a sudden God vision that is very distinct, that must be addressed and becomes actionable. That can suddenly come on and present. These clear visions can happen in these states. But as the debris clears, these visions occur and they're obvious. And there are other God omnipotencies that are not what would be called visioning. That is one major aspect, but there are other dimensionalities to them which are to be expressed. Now, about powers as they manifest as science, and about how science, God in the happening of science, accepts or does not accept these God omnipotencies. Again, most of God manifestation is undetectable to sensory perception. But many of these seeming God powers, God Shaktis, have actually been the cause of scientific evolution and advance. They've converted into what is called the products and production of science, the technologies, the innovations, the ever-advancing evolution of science, and how it manifests. So what were considered superpowers or magic, etc., and all these labels that are not, that are within fiction in order to be able to describe them somehow or other. Through the evolution, they've been implemented and manifest themselves as somewhat of God Intel Tech. Such phenomenon as the ability to see through body hallucinations into them, God in the form of, or to vision down to micro nano level, microscopic, etc., or up into macro of telescopic and satellite and various technologies in order to see into and above, beyond, and all of that ever expanding. So all of those are God omnipotencies that are manifest and accepted as what are called normal phenomena. But would have been considered impossible until they actually became manifest as God manifesting. Into God reality. So in this evolution, all of that will ever expand. And it's an ongoing, continual processing. So the, what are called the para and super, etc., are those God omnipotence that have not yet been accepted or proven in some quantitative way to be possible, and to some extent are shunned within science as being not true, because they cannot, such activities cannot be explained through the lens of science yet. But this is the way the processing occurs, is that these phenomenons are not explained or accepted until they thus become so. And this has mainly to do with the rigidity of conceptual modeling and thought that lacks openness to the endless possibilities of God manifesting. So all of these powers, this God omnipotence, it have manifested, continue to manifest, and are God truth and God reality. Whether they can be God in the form of can be quantified just yet or not, the fact is that these powers are true. They are real. So God in the form of and happening of science just has to catch up and have the procedures and the technology, the ever-developing technology, in order to be able to, through experimentation and through documentation and through all the scientific process, basically, recognize them, recognize these capabilities. And of course, this recognition is to exponentially advance science and the technologies. So these got in the form of these Siddhis, Shaktis, powers, etc., for introductory purposes, can be categorized in some major categories, taxonomies, and then are to be presented again in subcategories of seeming abilities. So for now in eternity, the major abilities categories are expounded. So God, thought, and speech. It's not speech of an individual or thought of an individual again. There are none. This is direct God thought, direct God speech. Not thought trapped inside a body hallucination. So thought and speech are energy. They are God energy. They are God Shakti. So there's Shakti within silence. And thought Shakti and speech Shakti. These are God powers. They affect directly in consciousness. Activate in consciousness. They are actions as such, and powers. So there are various categories of God's speech. There is the first, again, which, like Turyatita, is not a state or a category. It's transcendent. So there's transcendence, transcendent of all God's speech, the God silence. And again, God's silence is underlying all sound. Sound is interpenetrating sound and speech and thought. So it's God's silence, which is eternal, in which all sound vibrance occurs. That emanates forth from silence. So God's speech, and God thought first, comes from that silence. That's why it is direct in God consciousness. So God directly speaking to God about God comes from that direct transcendence, and then God's silence. Then paravak. Vak is speech in Sanskrit. So paravak, issuing forth directly from God. Immanence, within. Oming. It is like eternal sonar resonancing. Within consciousness, God consciousness. Then spashyanti, which seemingly, this is when it starts to seem like something, but isn't. Pashyanti is the witnessing or the watching of thought formationing. But again, there is no real witness. So God directs speech is not from that standpoint. Then madhyama, which is the actual mind-thought formations that seem to exist. When thoughts, what seem to be internal thoughts, are seen as actually manifest in some way. And then vikara, when the speech, the thought becomes speech that's thrust out seemingly. Or when there is listening. Again, there is no internal or external. But that is when it seemingly the speech becomes overtly manifest. So there's the powers, the God powers of thought and speech, and how those powers activate, transmit and receive, and directly affect what then seem to be God actions. But again, it's God actioning already. All of it is actioning, creating more, manifesting more actioning. But those, the seeming results of that are referred to as physical actions. But in reality, God reality, there are no distinctions such as that. It is all God actioning. So thought and speech are actionings and powers. That is why it is important to be aware of how those powers are used and what the thought content, what is being delivered, what is being transmitted and received, and the effect of those powers. Once this information, this God information, is transmitted, it becomes obvious that awareness of how seeming words are used, it becomes very important. It is not to be taken lightly. Words, speech is action. And speech has effect. Absorb this. Experiment. Understand this power. Another aspect is God vision. Now, God vision, whole vision, is expansive and boundless, obviously. There are no what are called coincidences in relativity. Again, that posits aberrance and unusualness of events. But when all that is seen through, there are no coincidence here happening here and there occasionally. No past, present, future. It is all a continuous, endless flow. Of the whole. So it is God synchro-eventing, God spont-syncing, God happenings occurring spontaneously and all at once in God eternity. No past, present, future. Happening all at once in God eternity. Access to all of that. Immediate and direct access to all God information. That is the quote, potentiality that is to be God realized and manifest. Now, this is what purification and deconstruction and dehypnotism is all about. It is about the clearing of all of that superimposition in order to directly God experience God itself directly, with nothing in the way. Then all God spont-syncing, God synchro-eventing. There is no occasional surprising eventing. It is happening all the time in eternity. Quote, all the time. Now, 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 now. So God transmission and receiving of thought, of sound, God transmitting and receiving of visions, direct visions, God transmitting and receiving of energetic fields in God omnidimensional reality. God omnitranslational, ability of God omnidimensioning. This is not a universe. The seeming detectable universe is a tiny speck in the whole of God manifestation. So God omniphysicality is but an aspect of God. And the God omnimathics that creates or generates it. There is intimate knowledge of God myself. It is accessible to all seeming as God, you as God. Well, there's direct knowledge of the goading or godding, the God vision of the signs endlessly presenting in God omnidimensionality. And of course, the ability to discern God reality from fictional superimposition, and also to immediately discern the ignorance that's phenomenons and reconfigures. So there's clear seeing through all of that and no effect of it. Such are examples of God omnipotence, those Shakti powers, of God vision direct, seeing through those fictions like as such transparencies, like what would be spoken of as X-ray vision. Just seeing right through. Not a superpower. Natural God power. Now, to use what would be called psi terminology, just for its usefulness of the words in conveying, there are three main clairs of what are called the clairs, or the clairvoyant, no, the clairs, which mean the clears, clear this, clear that, beyond thought and sense. There's claircognizance, which is a way of expressing what is beyond God's thought. Or without logic, without what's called rationality, interference or superimposition, where there's just knowing. So that would be translated into God omniscience. So in psi terminology, it would be knowing without rationality or thought in the way of it. Just knowing. Without having to explain why or rationalize or intellectualize why about something, but just knowing or suddenly knowing or something, and not having to express in any other way, and then actioning from that direct knowing. Then there's clairvoyance, which has many aspects. And it means clear vision. So in Godlang, that's God vision. Again, these are not, in psi language, this seems to be of that entities are having clear knowing, or entities have clear vision. So this is omnitranslational of these word concepts and expressing what the God reality is directly. So the clear vision is God vision with no occlusion. So it's God, like cosmic vision, being able to see, not with senses, not with species physicality, And it is not this will be mentioned, but it is not to be really spoken of or expanded upon. What in the fictional spirituality is called third eye, as if there's a location in a body where it exists, or that it needs to be cleaned or defragmented or purified or whatever. It isn't about a physical location. That God vision is not, it is not physical. It is not in time and space. So speaking of with such terms as third eye or purification of third eye is not, it posits two eyes already existing, and somehow there's a third thing or entity, and that is not the proper way to convey such information. It is God vision that is above and beyond physicality of location. So that would be, if referred to at all, would be just a symbol of it. So clear vision, God vision of all God phenomenon and phenomenon and eventing of what is called past, present, and future events, but are not such, because that is the overlay. All eventing takes place in God, eternity, always. It never takes place anywhere else. And all being accessible in God, eternity, being available to in God's sight. So what is referred to as precognition or presentiment, or being able to see what is seemingly occurring now, in between, before and after, or past and future. So these distinctions in the words don't convey the actual reality. So precognition, or say what is called postcognition, or having access to information of seeming events that already occurred without, quote, knowledge of them, unquote. So all of that becomes the verbiage becomes a way of, unfortunately, it gets mired in sort of fictional concepts. But they're being presented in order to speak of the God reality. So since there is God, there's access to all God information that seemingly occurred in a past, or seemingly is to occur in a future, or seemingly is occurring now. And God reality is occurring eternally now, always. All of that information is accessible. So that is the vision of that. So the precognition, the presentiment, the retrocognition, all of those inadequate words. And then telepathy, meaning the transmitting and receiving of God to God, God content, with no delay, just as God speaking to God about God. So it's God transmission and receiving. And there is no location or transit time delay. It's instantaneous. So all seeming minds or thought currents are in the God networking that allows that as possible. Or what is called remote viewing. The same, it's God vision. There's no viewing of information that is somewhere else. It is all within God myself and accessible as immediate and direct. So again, remote viewing indicates there's a distance somehow. So again, these words that are inadequate are being explained in and expounded upon in the true God truth, reality, and content. And then there is clairaudience, the word clairaudience, which should be all soundings, all words. The hearing of, the seeming hearing of, but not through senses. Again, transmitting and receiving, God transmitting and receiving in the form of seeming sound, which is sort of a sonar with non-locality involved. And then there is what is called God direct action, God manifesting. Again, all of what is being presented is God manifesting, and all of it is God action. But this category would then refer to the phenomenological, quantifiable materialization So again, thought and speech have to be within that category as well. God, thought, and speech. And it is Shakti. Shaktipat, or psychokinesis. Now, Shaktipat, God, thought, and speech is also Shaktipat. It's a transmission affecting what seems to be overtly manifest, seen. So this is God omnipotence and power affecting what seems to be material. So it is God consciousness, God unseen, and having direct effect on God manifestation that is seen. That is the omnitranslational way of expressing what Psi would call psychokinesis, etc. But again, there is no internal or external. And there is no distinction in between something or some entity having effect on some other entity or thing or situation, etc. So it is the effect on a God manifestation that is seen in some way, quantifiable. So God manifestation is completely malleable. God omnipotence, God consciousness can have direct effect on the God structuring of God manifestation through modifying, goading. So again, what seems to be solid actually is not solid. All the Shaktis, powers, God omnipotence directly affects the structuring. And this is not, again, this is not occasional as in the form of some miracle. It happens here or there. This is ongoing, with direct access to being able to God manifest and shift the malleability, shape shift it, have direct effect on it. There is such capability as transmitting energetic resonance that seems to be local or at a distance, but again is all non-local in God myself. Or what would be called spontaneously healing. What are called miraculously healing illnesses. And modification of all bodily seeming body hallucination functionings directly. What is starting to become known as epigenetics or neuroplasticity, etc., what is starting to show up on the scientific radar as being the effect, although there is not full knowledge of what it actually is, where it emanates from. All that direct power can endlessly modify that physicality. So there is the being of God, the realization of the God Absolute. That absolute stillness. That unassailability. The eternal now. And then there is the God manifesting. The God omnipotence, God Shakti, which is inseparable within God. By which God shapes and creates and manifests in endlessly synchro-eventings of itself out of God itself. God realizing and actualizing the seeming physicality within itself. The infinite and boundless potentialities that become reality of itself. that boundless creativity within itself. God, myself. This is God, you. These are you, God, powers, your God powers, God omnipotence, God omniscience, to the knowing of all of it. So this is an introduction to your powers. The first step is to remove the disbelief that this somehow is not true or realizable. So all the believing has to be cleared. And then it will start to become very apparent. The God truth of this God information. So there are to be many teachings to occur about God manifesting, God willing. And this serves as the introduction. Om. God speaking directly to God about God. Bless this convergence in all its phenomenal aspecting, seen and unseen. Om. Satyanandam. Om. Tat Sat.